Hello, I'm here again in the dying of the light, the gloaming. Um, and I'm thinking about stage fright and the subconscious. Uh, so I was reminded in discussion I had with a good friend today about an article that was written by the late Cormac McCarthy, which is called The Kekulé Problem. And it appears in it's on a website called Nautilus. I'll put the link in the description. And in that article, he talks about a chemist, presumably, whose last name is Kekulé. And he famously is trying to understand the molecular structure of benzene. And he's trying to think about it, with words, the way we think, to try to get to the answer, to try and uncover the answer. Or even beyond words, I would say he's just trying to consciously think about it. And then he falls asleep and he has a dream in which he dreams of the Ouroboros, the snake, sort of coiled around itself, eating its own tail. And then he wakes up and he has this realization that the benzene molecule is in the shape of a ring. So it's this famous moment where his subconscious gave him the answer in the form of a symbol or an image. And Cormac McCarthy, who's a fantastic writer, he makes this observation that the nature of the subconscious insight is not usually something that it can express to the conscious mind in words, which is inconvenient to us as creatures who possess the faculty of language, because often the most efficient way to describe things to us is in the form of words, right? Just to offer a description of something, or like a yes or no question, for example. It's very handy to have words. But he notices that there seems to be this refusal sometimes, or inability of the subconscious mind to actually engage the consciousness at a linguistic or semantic level. And so instead we have to actually interpret our subconscious through the symbols and emotional states that it provides to us. And I'm still fascinated by this idea. I think it's something that psychoanalysts, of course, were fascinated by. But it's interesting, so yesterday listening to this Tony Robbins seminar thing, and he's talking about something I've heard people mention before. So he's contrasting. This is how it relates to stage fright. So we've talked briefly about the subconscious and its ability to communicate, and now we're going to try and tie that to the stage fright idea. So he's contrasting these two situations which he was involved in, and I believe the two performers were Bruce Springsteen and Carly Simon, respectively. So two very established songwriters and performers. But he was talking about how he was called upon when Carly Simon was having a kind of nervous breakdown over her stage fright. And he talked about how physiologically Bruce Springsteen before he goes on stage and Carly Simon before she goes on stage, they have the same physiological emotional state of being, sweating, tension in their hands, raised heartbeat, etc. Right? And he said the only difference is that Bruce Springsteen interpreted that as a state of excitement and readiness. He said, okay, this means I'm ready when I feel this. Whereas Carly Simon is sort of the opposite and says, no, I'm not ready. I know I'm having a panic attack, basically. And that, and so, it's kind of obvious he uses this to make the point that it's just up to us to interpret what our emotional state is. So he's using this to paint a broader picture of his kind of steamroll-y style that is emblematic of a lot of self-help guys. Not necessarily a criticism of them, it's just this kind of tendency they have to go, just push through it, persevere, rewrite your narrative, story, whatever. So it got me thinking, these two things kind of got me thinking about my own relationship with stage fright, because it's something that has been a bit of a thorn in my side in my youth as a musician, where I sort of came to believe that regardless of my technical ability on an instrument, that would not translate to a live performance, because whenever I found myself in a position where I was playing live, I would start to lock up and forget things and just generally feel as if I was less capable than I was if I was just practicing something alone in a room. And so I interpreted this as stage fright, and so I started slapping that label on like what my psychological issue is. But what I've come to realize over time is that the subconscious may not be invested in language as much as the conscious mind is, but it is certainly very intelligent. I think to some degree, of course, our intelligence feeds through from our subconscious to our consciousness. And this is something that McCarthy mentions in the context of conversation or thought generation, that you really are not able to use words to formulate ideas. Rather, the ideas are formulated and then you can use words to describe what the mental process that has already happened. But this subconscious intelligence that knows things about you, knows about your situation, knows what your capabilities are, again, it doesn't express that to you in straightforward words. So when you do have a feeling of anxiety about something, it's often hard to really pinpoint what that is from the perspective of your consciousness. And so it's very tempting to attribute it to a general kind of field anxiety, like just a kind of general bad vibe around something like performing, for example, rather than recognizing that often your subconscious is actually warning you about a very specific threat, but it's not able really to do that effectively with words. And so you get this misinterpretation or translation problem. So in my case, I remember distinctly, I was at a workshop at some point And this guy said had this line. It was a very influential line on me. He said, if you're practicing and then you hesitate, there's a moment in the whatever you're practicing where you hesitate. That is the moment that you will make a mistake on stage. So he's observing that, he made this observation in a kind of a passing way, but I found it very, I could feel in that moment how poignant of a point that was, because it's true, when you're doing something that's technically demanding, like playing an instrument, you have to be able to just glide through whatever it is that you're doing. If there's any jags that you might hitch on in a practice setting, you will definitely hitch on them in a performance, and that's a big problem. If there are enough of those, then it's really something, you're not ready to play, right? That's the bottom line. You're not ready to play at that point. And when you're alone in a room, you can sort of fool yourself that maybe you could. And it's this kind of ego, it's like you can flatter yourself more easily when you're by yourself. And even in a rehearsal setting, you can kind of get through on the energy and just say like, well, all right, I messed it up, but like I'm not going to mess that up on stage. You might say that to yourself, but does your subconscious believe that? If it doesn't, it's probably wise in its assessment that you're actually not ready to play. And so it's pretty clear then that it's very easy to misinterpret the anxiety. If your ego is in this state of trying to flatter yourself about how good you are at something, or convince you that you're ready when you actually haven't spent enough time practicing, then your ability to actually perform gets thrown under the bus, because your subconscious pumps the brakes. It says you are not actually ready to play. But it doesn't say that with words. It just says that with this, it just pushes against you. It just goes, nope, don't do that, right? And again, you can't fight that by white knuckling it. Because if you're not ready to play and you kind of engineer a situation where you have to play anyway, you're going to fuck up. And you're going to confirm your own worst fear. And I've known people where this has happened to them, where they basically experience a trauma. And to a degree, this has happened to me. I wouldn't say it's like ever been catastrophic, but it's been like bad enough where I was like, yeah, I really like fucked that up, And then you kind of feel it even more in the future. But can you see how it's such a mistake to say that what that is stage fright? Because it might be. Like stage fright is a thing that exists, I suppose, in theory. But I think people are too quick to classify it as a phobia rather than a rational fear of doing something difficult in front of other people when you're not ready to. Those are distinct. Those are two distinct, like you see, phobia versus legitimate unreadiness. So it's interesting, yeah. I think I'm gonna wrap it up pretty soon, but it is a very intriguing push and pull, this unconsciousness, uh, and the idea that it doesn't tell us things straight up. And sometimes it just doesn't tell us things. Sometimes you don't even you get radio silence even like with symbols and stuff. So you just genuinely don't know yourself completely. And that seems to be by design, right? And I think it's fascinating that the cosmos works the same way. So Blaise Pascal made this observation in his book Pensée, if you can call it a book. It's really just a collection of notes that sort of someone cobbled together after he died. But there's some brilliant notes, and he does mention that that the idea of God is just elusive enough that you could convince yourself of his or her existence or non-existence either way. So you never really know, right? You can decide. You can use faith or a particular system of logic or whatever to draw your own conclusions, but the certainty is just not there. So what that means is that we're on a kind of need-to-know basis with the universe as well. So both internally and externally, there seems to be this limitation of language and therefore of concrete knowledge by design, which is fascinating. I think it's so to kind of, if you don't want to read the Kekulé problem article, the TLDR is, McCarthy's theory is that it's just the reason that the subconscious is sort of begrudging about using language is just that it is so much older than language, that language is maybe 100,000 years old, where it's been cooking up for like 2 million years. And so language is kind of the new kid on the block, and it doesn't want to just play ball with it. And I do think that's an interesting theory. But it also seems to go deeper than that. And I think something that he doesn't acknowledge actually there, even though I think he would acknowledge it, is that there's something faulty about language. There's something insufficient about it, which Wittgenstein was famous for pointing out. And postmodernism is very ready to point that out as well. There's something insufficient about it. And so even though it's very useful, the most important messages that the subconscious wants to send are not able to be put into words. And so I think there is this recognition, and there's an old understanding that sacred experiences in life occur in moments of mental stillness and silence, right? And I actually think if you look at, if you read The Passenger by Cormac McCarthy, it's a fantastic novel. It's a novel I would recommend to anyone to read. If you have, if you like what Cormac McCarthy's bringing to the table, I think you'll love that book. It's really about a guy who is fantastically intelligent, very clever, but his intellect pales in comparison to that of his sister, who is a math genius. And I think it's fair to say that Cormac McCarthy had a bit of a complex, which even comes through a little bit in the Kekulé problem, which is that he is one of the greatest writers to have ever lived. His facility with words in many ways is unparalleled by his contemporaries. but he still recognizes that he is not nearly as intelligent or smart as a maths genius, basically. This is what it seems to boil down to in his mind, where he thinks he's smarter than most people, right? That comes through pretty clearly. But he also has this special, hero worshipy kind of place in his heart for people who seem to be able to grasp the universe on a deeper level than just language. So, yeah, there you go. I think that's all my thoughts that I have on that. But I have one final thought, which is actually important. So my friend posed a question, which I think is an important question. He was talking about the idea of soothing your subconscious, right? If our subconscious cannot communicate its desires to us directly, but makes us feel things, then it puts us in a bit of a quandary with, as its sort of caretaker, right? If indeed that's how you kind of see things. Because how do we give it what it wants if we don't know exactly what it wants? And it's funny, when he said that, the first thing that came to mind, and I think it's very apt, I said that one reliable way that people soothe their subconscious is through art. And I really think that is because people struggle to do it through therapy, right? People struggle to do it by digging around. But art has this quality where you are actually projecting your subconscious out and letting it express itself beyond the limitations of rumination, right? So it goes beyond just going like, hey, subconscious, how do you feel about this? How do you feel about that? And then sort of generating this inner dialogue with something, which, again, the psychoanalyst would probably call your superego rather than your id, like your true subconscious. You're sort of just making a dialogue up. Whereas when you have a conversation with someone, I think that's where it becomes art, right? Even though you're using words in something like a novel or a conversation or a poem, the words take on this very different flavor than just simply quizzing yourself. It starts to channel something that you don't actually understand, and certainly goes beyond just the words that you're using. It seems to take on a soul, which is why you can actually read back what you've written and it can move you, and you can see things later that you didn't see at the time in what you'd written, which is quite puzzling. And it sort of goes to another level when you are making music or using imagery, where you can actually sort of capture feelings or show something that you've seen in the world, that it's almost like you saw it or you heard it with your own ears or you saw it with your own eyes. But the art itself shows that you perceived something more than what your consciousness perceived. And again, you can be moved by that. And that is, again, a sort of a puzzling thing. It's an affront to your ego. And it's something that a lot of artists, it's why they talk about having a muse, and that they feel like they can't fully take credit for their own work, which is definitely something I deal with, right? They'll often flippantly say, I'm happy to take the royalty check or whatever. But actually, I don't desire to take credit for the art per se, because that somehow seems to actually cheapen it and give people the wrong impression about what it is. And I think that's where the sort of fingerprint of the subconscious is shown. So I hope you enjoyed that. And if you're watching this and you haven't subscribed to the channel, subscribe to the channel, because I'm trying to get to 20 subscribers. I'm at 19. So if I get to 20, which I'm sure I will eventually, then I'm going to make a goofy 20 subscriber special where I open a pack or several packs of very old Caltech Socceroos booster packs for a card game that no one plays anymore. So that'll be something to look forward to. All right, lots of love, guys. I will see you next time.